about the value of every single child. There's no way to really know at this point, but the best guess that we have is about 200,000 children were born this year that would not have been born. That's 200,000 kids. That's 200,000 smiling faces on playgrounds. That's 200,000 silly songs starting in kindergarten. That's 200,000 families that'll be blessed with looking in the eyes of a child, saying that every single child is valuable. So for us, we're celebrating a Dobbs decision. We're celebrating the option to be able to be turned back to the American people where it was before, to be able to make the decision about the value of every single child. Now, multiple states are making different decisions on this, but we're grateful to be able to have the dialogue at least happening around the country so that once again, we're not talking about legal issues, we're talking about heart issues, and we're talking about the value of every single child. I'm a firm believer that every child is valuable. There aren't some children that are disposable and some children that are valuable. Every child is valuable. The Dobbs decision a year ago turns it back to the American people to say, that's what I believe. I believe every child is valuable. What do you believe? Let's have this dialogue and let's initiate that, whether it is in that building or whether it's in state capitals all over the country, to be able to have this ongoing dialogue. So a few of my colleagues are here as well as many people that speak out and continue to be able to stand for life every single day, because we share the same common value, that every child is valuable and every child deserves to be loved. And if we are going to be a nation that believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, let's begin with the most basic element of believing in the value of every single life as well. So let me call up some of my colleagues. Kevin Kramer, why don't you come join us?
Thank you, James, and thanks to all of my colleagues that are here today. And it is indeed a good moment to celebrate, an important anniversary to celebrate the return of federalism in this case, as well as turning over the ultimate decisions to elected officials, not courts, and certainly not bureaucrats. Just tagging on to what Senator Langford said with regard to the point of all this is to save lives. We're in the life-saving business here in this issue. For my little state of North Dakota, a state of fewer than 800,000 people, we estimate, based on the data, that lives saved every month amount to over 90 a month in North Dakota. Over 90 a month. Not only is that a beautiful face, a smiling baby, soon to be a young, playful toddler, but it's a labor force. It's productivity. It's people who are at the very essence of our economy, as well as in our heart, in our soul, and all creatures created by God in His image. I would also add that while we do this, others are angry about it, and they want to change laws that are much more radical, that don't celebrate life. And they don't celebrate the religious expression and freedom that we enjoy here in the freest nation in the world. So with that, I'm just grateful, James, for you organizing this. I'm grateful for all of the supporting organizations that stand for life. And by the way, not only do they stand for life, but they're on the front line saving lives. Not only saving lives, but ministering and supporting the lives that are saved, and the lives of the parents that now find themselves as new parents. So thank you to all of you as well. Now I turn over to Senator Marshall, who's been a great warrior for saving babies' lives, much more so than all the rest of us.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, James. Thank you, Kevin. Well, as Senator Langford mentioned, this week marks a year since the Dobbs decision, but it's also been almost 50 years since the Roe issue and the Roe decision. And I think this is a good night that we stop and reflect on America's history. And it's a good moment for us to stop and remember why this issue is important and who we're fighting for. I think the who we're fighting for is easy. Obviously, we're fighting for those babies that were conceived yesterday, that were conceived 2 weeks ago, and for those future babies as well that are unborn as well. I think who we're fighting for is easy, but the why this issue is important, I think, is a bit more complicated. To some, this has been a legal battle, but to me, this has always been an issue of the heart. And at the center of the conflict, at the crux of the issue, the heart of the disagreement is, when does life begin? When does life begin? I think no one can stand up here and argue that the Constitution doesn't protect that life once life begins. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a constitutional expert, I'm not an authority on previous legal precedent, but I have delivered a baby most every day of my life for some 30 years. And I think that gives me some insight on what life is and how do you define when life begins. I remember back in medical school asking myself that question. And I had some who would argue, well, when a baby takes its first breath, that's when life begins. But you know, actually, at the end of the first trimester, babies are gulping and taking their first breath. And others would say once a baby's born and it cries, that's when life begins. And I think there's some truth to that. I've seen miscarriages at 12 weeks, at 16 weeks, and 20 weeks, and every week of a pregnancy, I suppose. And every one of those babies, when it's born, is fighting for life. That it's trying to gasp for air, that it wants to be born and it wants to live. I think that certainly life is certainly beginning by that point in time. A lot of the world has said life begins at 15 weeks. At least that would be the low bar, that would be the minimal standard, and that makes sense that certainly life begins by 15 weeks. That's when a baby feels pain. That's when a baby responds to its brother or sister's voice in the room. When I use an ultrasound and I put it next to the baby typically responds in some way, shape, or form. And when that baby inside the womb hears its brother or sister or its mom's voice, often you can see the baby kicking and maybe its heart rate increasing. Some would argue that life begins at 12 weeks. For a long time, that's what we were being taught, that certainly begins by 12 weeks. After all, that's when we could hear it with a Doppler. But now we can hear a baby's heartbeat. We can see it on an ultrasound just 4 weeks after conception. So when does life begin? You want to know when I really began to understand and believe why life begins at conception was taking care of women with miscarriages. Again, 1 out of 4 women, 1 out of 3 women have a miscarriage. Very common. And every one of those women, whether it was a month after conception or 2 months after conception, grieved. They were grieving because they lost the life of that baby. Tell a woman who's had 3 miscarriages or 4 miscarriages and can't carry a pregnancy, tell her that life doesn't begin at conception. Talk to an infertile couple who spent years and a fortune trying to conceive. And when they finally do conceive, tell them that life doesn't begin at conception. So I believe in the miracle of life. I believe that life begins at conception. And that's why we're here today, to honor this Dobbs decision. It's our responsibility to be a voice for the voiceless, to honor the sanctity of life, and fight to protect the lives of the millions of unborn babies. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming here. I frame the question slightly differently. I personally believe life begins at conception, but I think one of the reasons I like Justice Alito's decision is he framed the question properly. He said the issue of abortion is a profound moral issue for all of us. And I believe the relevant question is, at what point does society have the responsibility to protect that life? I didn't think 9 members of the Supreme Court should decide that for all of society. I don't think 535 members of Congress should decide that. Back in Wisconsin, my home state, I don't believe 132 members of the Wisconsin legislature should decide that question. The beauty of the Dobbs decision is it sent it back to we the people to decide that profound moral issue. So what I proposed is a one-time single-issue referendum held in each state, whether it's binding or advisory, to again pose that question: have we the people decide at what point does society have the responsibility to protect life? Because this was taken out of the hands of we the people. For 50 years, we haven't had the discussion. We haven't had the education in terms of what life looks like at 4 weeks and 8 weeks and 12 weeks and 16 weeks. We haven't had the discussion about what abortion looks like at various stages. We also haven't had the discussion of what a woman facing an unplanned pregnancy is going through as well. One of the things I've always valued the pro-life movement is I think the pro-life movement has been highly compassionate to women facing an unplanned pregnancy. It's the pro-life movement is looking at adoption options. I don't quite understand how the pro-life movement, how Republicans have been maneuvered into be the extremists in this political debate. My referendum, by the way, would have 10 choices on the ballot. Again, at what point does society have the responsibility to protect the life of an unborn child? At conception, at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, all the way up to 9 months, which would basically make the statement that an unborn child has no right to life. That is the extreme position. That is the position of the Democrat Senate and of the left. So again, I want we the people to decide this, but we need to have the education, we need to have the thoughtful discussion societally before we go into the ballot box and hold that referendum to either advise our legislators or to have a binding referendum within each state. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's great to see everybody here. Saturday is the 1-year anniversary of the Roe or the Dobbs decision, which really is a celebration of life. And my colleagues have covered it very well. Dr. Marshall covered it really well from a perspective that very few of us have an appreciation for. But I think all of us are here to say that we as a country support a culture of life. We believe profoundly that every life matters, and that we ought to reduce the number of abortions in this country. And what the Dobbs decision essentially said and did was return that decision back to the states, whereas where it should have been decided in the first place. That was a wrongly decided decision. Roe was 50 years ago, and Dobbs made that wrong right. But it is incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can to support a culture of life in this country. And so many of the pro-life advocates, the people who have fought these last 50 years to get to where we are today with this decision, are the people who are out there day in and day out helping, assisting, ministering to, caring for those moms and those babies. I've seen that in my own state, my own family. I've seen my wife and my daughters are involved with an organization that just does that very thing. And we want to see more of that in this country, people who feel passionately about the importance of life, celebrating life, and making sure that we're doing everything we can as a culture to value life. And so this is a celebration. It's a 1-year anniversary, and we are here to say that we support not only that decision, but the effort that continues to go on to educate people in this country about the importance of life and caring for the most vulnerable among us. Thank you.
I want to add my thanks to Senator Langford for holding this momentous press conference event as we celebrate the anniversary of what is the most consequential, or at least the second most consequential Supreme Court decision in the history of the country. Before Roe, no other decision in the history of the Supreme Court has cost 60 million lives. 60 million lives, more than 1 million a year for 49 years. And so therefore the Dobbs decision, again, of the top 2 most consequential Supreme Court decisions in the history of the country, a decision that began to save life, hundreds of thousands saved already this year. Credit needs to be given where it's due. Thank God for President Trump appointing conservative pro-life justices, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Gorsuch. Thank God for Senator McConnell for holding up what we now have confirmed would have been the disastrous appointment of Merrick Garland, confirmation to the Supreme Court. What a disaster that would have been. and to rush through at warp speed Amy Coney Barrett onto the court. Thank God for the courage of Senator McConnell. Thank God for the Supreme Court justices, their courage in the face of unprecedented threats, harassment, intimidation, did the right thing in overturning the Dobbs decision. And thank God for, as represented behind us here today, the courageous pro-life warriors who battled for 49 years, many times, many of us wondering, would this decision ever be overturned? One would hope that one day history will judge those who support abortion today like we judge those who supported slavery in years past. And as slavery was the scourge on our nation's history of the 17 and 1800s, so is abortion of the 1900s and the 2000s, and would hope that one day we would look upon those who supported abortion the same way we look upon those who supported slavery. You know, I appreciate what my colleagues have said today. Many have misinterpreted the Dobbs decision and say, hey, this turned it back to the states. But as was said by Senator Langford, it turned it back to the people. It turned it back to the people's representatives, and that includes this Congress. May we show the same boldness, the same courage that the Supreme Court showed. And as Senator Marshall said, may we stand up for life from conception, not putting a timeline and negotiating the timetable of life, but standing up for all life from conception. Some things are worth doing because they are right, because they are moral, irrespective of the politics, as we change hearts and minds and win people over to the position of life. And as someone has already said, the other side, the Democrat Party, has become the party of death, the party of abortion up to the moment of birth, maybe even beyond, no restrictions at any time for any reason, and you get to pay for it with your tax dollars. They've surrendered all the center ground on that issue. May we be the party of life. I'm proud to stand with my colleagues today. And I see our chairman of our pro-life caucus right to my right, Chris Smith from the House as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you, James, for bringing us all together. You know, just let me say a couple very brief comments. For decades, right up to this very moment, abortion purveyors have gone to extraordinary lengths to ignore, trivialize, and cover up the battered baby victim. They've aggressively fostered a culture of denial, profound disrespect, and bias, prejudice against unborn babies. You know, Dr. Marshall mentioned a moment ago about the question of when human life begins. Well, back in 1973, Justice Blackmun, in the infamous Roe versus Wade decision, said, and I quote, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when human life begins," and then went on to legalize abortion right up until the moment of birth. How could you not resolve that? How could you not even address it? And that's what they did. And for 50 years, that horrible decision has prevailed. Thankfully, with Justice Alito writing what I thought was a brilliant decision, he has conveyed to lawmakers at every level, local, federal, state, every level, the ability to write law and policy to protect innocent unborn children. You know, according to the National Right to Life Committee, about 64.5 million unborn babies have been killed by abortion since Roe versus Wade. And that's a loss of children's lives that equates with the entire population of the country of Italy. 64.5 million kids. It's mind-boggling. So many children and so many wounded women. I've been in this movement for 50 years, got involved in 1972. This movement and the people who make up the pro-life movement love them both, mother and baby, and we do everything we possibly can to help both of them. You know, post-Dobbs, very briefly, 14 states ban abortion while others have enacted laws that are in effect to prohibit abortions, one of them at 6 weeks, one at 12 weeks, one at 15, 18 weeks, one and 20 weeks, one. But again, 14 have banned it completely. Another 8 states have new protections that are now being held up by local courts. Hopefully we will prevail in the courts on that. Tragically, there are a number of other states, including my own state of New Jersey, where we have passed under Governor Murphy abortion on demand right up until the moment of birth. That is barbaric. It is anti-child. It is anti-mother. It's anti-life. The Democrats in the House, as my colleagues know, and it was stopped, thank God, by the senators here who were with us today. Twice last Congress passed a bill, misnamed the Women's Health Act, that would provide for abortion right up until the moment of birth and would eviscerate every pro-life protection on the books in all 50 states. We have begun a new debate a new debate on abortion, and I do believe that people are with us already, and as increasingly they realize the carnage that it has caused, will rally even more going forward. Thank you.
So we're going to break up in just a moment. If you want to be able to talk to individual members, there'll be individual members around to be able to talk about. But we're a nation of 340 million people now. It's a lot of dialogue, but we're having the dialogue now. If we go back a year ago, before the Dobbs decision, those 9 members in the Supreme Court said, we'll decide. No one else gets to but us. Post-Dobbs, it goes back to 340 million Americans and their representatives to be able to say, let's have a real dialogue about the value of every single child and whether children are valuable. I go back to the most basic principle. I believe there is no such thing as a disposable child. Children are valuable, and we should value every single life and every single child and do what we can as a society to be able to walk alongside those children. Now, 1 year post-Dobbs, we are doing that. We are in a post-Roe America, and this is an America that's having a bold, frank conversation about the value of every single child. Let's have it, because at the end of the day, I want to stand on the side of children. That's where I want to be able to stand. Moms, dads, and children. So thanks for being out here. Thanks for being part of the dialogue. We'll hang around and get a chance to be able to visit. Thanks, y'all, for being here. Thanks, y'all.